ever wondered why your ERP system isn't delivering what you were promised, the chances are the problem isn't the software, it's the design. Today on the ERP Perspective, we're joined by someone who has spent over 3 decades diagnosing and repairing ERP systems all over the world, often stepping in when someone else has given up. Dr. James A. Robertson, known widely as the ERP Doctor, brings an engineering mindset to a space dominated by IT thinking. He's built his entire career around a simple, confronting idea. ERP doesn't fail because it's complex. It fails because it's not engineered not to fail. James doesn't talk in buzzwords. He talks in root causes, structural integrity, design principles, and leadership behaviors. The things that actually determine whether an ERP becomes an asset or a liability. In today's conversation, we're going to dig into the symptoms of a sick ERP, why ERP is fundamentally an engineering project, not an IT project, the failure patterns he sees again and again, what predictable success looks like when an ERP is designed properly, and when to rescue a system versus when to rebuild one from scratch, and the leadership habits that separate stabilized ERP programs from the ones that never recover. And we'll end with a powerful question. If Dr. Robertson could rewrite one rule in every ERP contract on earth, what would it be and why? This is one of the most important and eye-opening conversations we've ever had on the show. Dr. Robertson, welcome to the ERP Perspective. The floor is yours. Welcome to the ERP Perspective. Good morning, Dr. James. It's great to have you on the show. Or should I call you the ERP Doctor? Perfect. Yeah, like I said, we've been speaking on LinkedIn for some time regarding obviously your experience across ERP. I know you've been in the industry, over 30 years. So I thought it'd be great to have you on the show to talk around a few different topics. And I know previously we were talking on your engineering background, and the main topic we wanted to discuss is why your ERP isn't delivering and how to fix it. But I've already done an introduction for the audience, but it'd be great to hear from yourself, your introduction to ERP and what's brought you up to this point.
Great. Well, George, great to be on the show. Thanks so much for the invitation. Real pleasure to be here. So really, in terms of how do I come to this point, started out way back, I did civil engineering and I needed a computer to process my data, got one of the first PCs in the days of the Apple II, etc. And on the side, computerized my father's investment consultancy so successfully that he was able to double turnover in 12 months because he could do things that his competitors couldn't do in terms of what I'd enabled. And that was a lesson that by the strategic application of just clever bits of computer technology, you could radically improve the business. And that stayed with me all the way through. That's kind of my underlying theme is how can I implement an ERP to give that sort of benefit, maybe not doubling turnover, but I've had other cases where there've been significant improvements. So one client not so long ago had to actually build a bigger warehouse, bigger distribution center because they were growing so fast because I'd helped them to differentiate themselves so powerfully. So that's been an underlying theme in everything that I do. So fast forward a few years, went back into the practice of engineering, got licensed as a professional engineer, and on the side, looking after the IT function, project managed and partially architected a management information system, which went on to become an industry niche vertical ERP. But that was my first exposure to ERP, very successful project, spoke at conferences and went out on my own in 89. And I'd speak at conferences about my successes. I also had some failures, by the way. I had some really ugly, in those early days, there were things that I didn't understand. For example, I discovered that the soft issues are actually harder than concrete. And I'd speak at a conference, the CEO would come up to me and say, Dr. Robertson, we really like what you're saying, but we don't have that. Please, can you help us? And I'd go in. And I discovered that I was very good at going in and literally within a couple of days, I would tell them why the ERP was not delivering and how to fix it. Fast forward a decade or so, and I'd done numerous of these investigations. I'd observed that there was a closed domain of factors that gave rise to the suboptimal ERP performance. So I sat down and wrote my book, The Critical Factors for IT Investment Success. If I wrote it today, it would be ERP Success. And I put together a series of courses and executive briefings, why your ERP is not delivering and how to fix it. And over the next 10 years, I presented those courses 66 times. And again, CEOs, CFOs attending those briefings, coming up to me afterwards and saying, we like what you've got to say, but we really don't have that. Can you help us? And so I've done dozens of these investigations across the board, SAP, JD Edwards, you name it, I've looked at it. And across the board of industries, manufacturing, distribution, medical, whatever. And the domain has remained finite. And we'll talk about that a bit more a bit later, I guess. And so fast forward, left South Africa in 2013, been over here for a while, difficulty breaking into the market. So I kind of went off on a bit of a side journey just as a chief operating officer and come back into really building my business in ERP quite recently. So that's where I am today, and that's how I got where I've got to. And the other part about that is that my whole approach is, according to the ERP industry, is upside down, but I say theirs is upside down, and I'll explain why I say that in a few minutes.
Fantastic. I mean, it's great to hear the challenges you had in your career as well. I mean, a lot of people talk about the success, but the challenges and the failures that you come across help you grow. They educate you in terms of how to do things differently. And on the ERP perspective, we want to educate the community. We want to empower them and unleash the perspective of different individuals. So it sounds like you've had a quite diverse and open career with different systems, different businesses, and being a all-round strategic advisor. How did you come up with the title, the ERP Doctor? How did that come
Well,
to
if
you?
you think of what I've just shared with you, it kind of happened naturally. Because basically what I do, if you go to a doctor, a general practitioner, they will ask you 2 or 3 questions. They'll look down your throat. They'll take your temperature, a couple of things, and they'll say, right, I think you've got this. Here's a prescription. If it hasn't cleared in 10 days, come back to me. Or, you know what, take 2 aspirin and go home and go to bed. Or, you know what, don't move, I'm calling an ambulance. And I'm basically the same. And they do that based on years and years of training and experience. So they just ask a few questions. They see exactly what the problem is. And I'm the same. I ask a few questions. I say, okay, I've seen that before. This is what I need to look at. I go down, I have a look at the system. I say, okay, there, confirm. This is what's wrong with your system. That's why I offer a service. I say, I'll go in, I call it a pulse measurement. I'll go in 2 days. I'll tell you why your ERP is not delivering, and I'll tell you how to fix it, and you don't have to pay me if I don't do it in 2 days.
Wow. I mean, it's a bold statement, but you've obviously had a lot of success doing that. And I know on one of our previous conversations, a quote that stuck with me was when you said, treat your ERP like an engineered system, not an IT gamble. So what do you mean by sort of that quote? And people listening, what does that actually mean?
So one of the things that I realized some distance down the track was that I was doing things very differently to the run-of-the-mill consultants in the industry. And for a while, it kind of puzzled me. And then I realized that in my undergraduate education, I spent 4 years learning civil engineering. We didn't once talk about the success of an engineering project. We spent 4 years learning why failure occurs and how to prevent failure. And so the fundamental difference between my approach and the industry approach is that they work hard for success, and I advise the client how to prevent failure. So you'll find I talk a lot about failure and the things that cause failure, and a lot of people in the conventional industry say, James, you're so pessimistic, so negative. Why do you talk? I say, well, if you don't understand failure, you're going to get failure. If you want to prevent failure, you need to understand failure, and you need to understand what you need to do to prevent failure.
I mean, it's not about living in the past or war stories, let's say. I mean, everybody's got them. We see them with Hershey's. We see them with Haribo. We see all these horror stories of how ERP can go wrong, but it's not about that. It's about preparing and being in a good place not to fall into those failures, not living in them or dramatizing them, just preparing your business in the best way and having them contingency plans if something does go wrong. And so I wouldn't say it's pessimistic. I think it's more being, well prepared, and you helping a business prepare and not fall into those pitfalls where other businesses
absolutely. I would challenge you on one point. It's not when things go wrong. If you do it my way, things don't go wrong.
Yeah.
Because you know what you're looking for. So part of what I advocate is on your project team, you have one person whose mandate is to look for signs of failure. To say in a meeting, hang on, what you just said is IT mythology, the system can't do that.
Yeah.
Or hang on here, this the custody of this thing needs to sit with the CEO, and it's sitting with the CFO, and that's not going to work.
I mean, yeah, I mean, 100 is a very good perspective there to obviously with this right advisory service or having someone with this level of experience, you shouldn't and you wouldn't go into those failures or those challenges that you might have. And as the ERP doctor, when a company says to you, our ERP isn't delivering, what are the first symptoms that you look for?
The first thing I look for is the CEO, the custodian of the ERP. So the ERP is transverse and cross-cutting. It cuts through the entire enterprise. The owner of that holistic integrated view of the business is the chief executive. If you go in and you make the CFO or the COO or the CIO or whatever the custodian of the project, they've got a skewed view because they're looking at their area with blinkers on. And part of getting the ERP to work is all of these people need to work together. To forgive my language, but the only person who has the authority to kick butt if they don't work together is the CEO. So CEO custody, as far as I'm concerned, is non-negotiable. So pretty much the first thing I look for is the CEO the custodian? And if the answer to that is no, then that ticks the first box of things that I need to deal with. I then go on and I look at strategy, and I define strategy as the essence of why the organization exists and how it thrives. I've been informed by McDonald. Strategy is doing the right things viewed from the customer's perspective. Professor Michael Porter, strategy is about differentiation. Dr. Michel Robert, every organization has a single strategic driving force, and I've elaborated that. And so I'm looking for the strategies. Just about the first question, and when I do these investigations, I start with the CEO, non-negotiable. And then I spend an hour with the CEO, ask some key questions, and then the CEO starts pointing me to people he thinks or she thinks I should talk to. And one of the first questions I ask is, what's the essence of your business and how does it thrive? Which is the essence of strategy. Sometimes they're really quick off the mark, and sometimes they kind of look at you and scratch their heads and say, I have to think about that for a minute. And I ask that question with each person I interview. And the next piece of that is your ERP supporting the strategic essence? And if the answer to that is no, actually it's getting in the way, that's the next box that I need to investigate. And I'll drill down as I go down to the system to understand the way the system is configured. Just a very simple example, very successful business, importation and distribution, and the service promise, if your order is in our call center by 3 p.m., we will dispatch by not later than 10 a.m. the next business day, working with just-in-time manufacturing clients. They did an implementation of a big brand ERP with a big brand implementer. They went live. They were 2 days late on their service promise. 6 months later, they'd lost their biggest client, 40% of their revenue, and they were about to lose the next 2 clients, and they called me in because nobody could fix it. I went in there in 3 days. I told them what the problem was, and basically in that particular case, they had to roll back to the previous system because the configuration was so sloppy that it couldn't be fixed quickly enough to stop them going out of business. But the point that I'm making is that just by understanding that one differentiator, order in by 3, dispatch by 10, I knew exactly what I was looking for. Why was it that wasn't happening? And then the third thing is what I call precision configuration. So let's just go there. I'm going to share a few slides. A little bit of more context here. This is a case study, FTSE 100 company, interviewing the CEO, running SAP R3 is a few years ago again. Neville, how do you rate SAP? And he said, well, operationally, I give it 7 or 8 out of 10. The business is running well, but at a strategic executive level, I'd give it 1 out of 10. I have 4 expensive accountants with teams who spend three weeks a month in Excel to produce the board pack because they can't get the information they need out of SAP. Now, SAP is a world-leading product. It was clear the problem wasn't with SAP. Just before I show you the answer, I'm going to just give you a bit of context, something that I call precision configuration. So let's say you're doing well, you've bought a house with a nice door like that, you want to hang the door, you need some screws for the hinges on that door, you expect to go into a hardware store and find the screws neatly arranged, but instead the shop assistant has this bin, tips it out on the floor and says, just search through that, I'm sure you'll find the screws. If you want it easier, we've got this fancy piece of equipment, it'll cost you $5 an hour, and it'll find the screws for you.
I mean, I know you've often said an ERP implementation is an engineering project.
Absolutely.
And it's not an IT project. So what I mean, you're kind of going onto this now, but what engineering disciplines apply most directly to an ERP implementation?
Can I hold that for 2 minutes? So now the reality is that the data you find in a lot of systems looks like this jumbled mess. So what am I talking about? Going back to the FTSE 100 client, this is their chart of accounts: scraping, loading, dosing, ripping and grading, engineering spares, foodstuffs, medicines. Absolutely no structure, absolutely no logic. And remember, we're talking here about an organization with 60,000 employees, one of the biggest SAP installations in that country. And it's a complete shambles. This is why he's got 4 senior accountants producing the board pack, because there's no logic. And if you go to the material groups, it's the same: aircraft engines, bicycles, 3 times pipe and pipe fittings. Absolute rubbish, absolute nonsense. And the shocking thing about it is that is quite common. Not necessarily as bad as that, but not well structured, not strategically structured. And what we're looking for is neatly arranged like this, hierarchical, structured. This is a chart of accounts that I've developed for a client. What you'll notice is the capital letters as headings to provide structure, the posting level accounts in proper case. You look at the indents. There's only a few items under each heading, and basically the codes mimic the hierarchy. So what that allows me to do is, with 2 clicks of my mouse, I can drill down by filtering on the code. And that's the difference between an engineered chart of accounts or an engineered item class or whatever. And so what you find is that the value you get escalates radically when you get to high level of precision in those areas. So this is one of the big reasons why I achieve success. And down here is one of the big reasons why you're looking for failure. And then to come to your question about what's the best discipline? Well, if you take what should I call it? A theoretical view on the subject, you would say that civil engineering is about the most unlikely discipline to get into ERP. But I'm a civil engineer. And the interesting thing I found is that engineers generally are better, but they tend to carry some baggage, and I'll go into that later. But the thing about a civil engineer is, if I design that bridge and that bridge falls down and kills somebody, I will end up in front of a disciplinary tribunal. I will probably lose my license. And if they can prove negligence, I may end up in jail for a very long time. Now, if we applied that approach to ERP implementations, just about the whole industry would be in jail.
Or 70% at least.
70% at least, yes. So I hope that answers your question. I think realistically, it doesn't matter too much what discipline of engineering you have, because you're trained to prevent failure. And if you take that and you link that training to my methods, I'm confident that you'll get a successful outcome.
And I know you mentioned failure there. I mean, what patterns do you see again and again that link to failure? And is there any that sort of still surprise executives?
Well, the 3 points that I've talked about, executive custody, strategy, and precision configuration, are the 3 big ones that give rise to failure. So these are the top 7. Lack of ERP alignment with core business strategy, lack of executive decision support, month-end reporting inefficiency. It takes you 3 weeks to produce a board pack instead of a couple of days. Dependency on implementers. The implementers are still there years after you went live. They should have left ages ago. Lack of audit readiness. The audit is a pain and costs you a fortune. Administrative inefficiencies. People have difficulty posting transactions. People don't trust the system, so they have spreadsheets outside the system, etc. And profitability drain. The business is just running inefficiently and it's costing you money. Those are the 7 big issues. In fact, I've recently designed an online survey which asks respondents to rank their ERP in terms of those 7 factors.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's good to obviously highlight. Is there anything else that falls outside of these 7, or from your career? Obviously, we mentioned the 3 main ones, but then these 7, most of the time, is it one of those issues? Not anything else that it can fall out of?
Well, that's a trick question if ever I heard one. George, there's an underlying factor which permeates pretty much the entire industry. And when I say pretty much the entire industry, is that I have only encountered 1 or 2 people who don't do this. So what I advocate is top-down configuration. You start with the C-suite, you start with the CEO, you start with the strategy, and you define that, and that defines the ambit of the configuration. So you drop down progressively with the precision configuration. Now, I'm going to say something that the average ERP person is going to scream and say heresy.
Go on.
So the problem we have is we start with process. We map processes, we configure processes, we processes till it's coming out of our ears. And we're starting with mid-level management who have no clue what the strategy of the business is. And we're trying to build up to strategic executive decision support. And the one thing that you can be sure of is you're not going to get there. So the industry way of implementation is predicated on creating failure, which is why you get at least 70% of ERP implementations do not deliver what was promised at the strategic executive level. And you can search on Google, you can search on Perplexity, you can go into any search engine and you'll find that number. It's about 70%. If you go and you talk to people offline, privately, off the record, it's probably closer to 95%.
Yeah, I have heard from the community that it's even higher.
Yeah.
Than the 70%.
Yeah. So just know, that it's really embarrassing for a CEO to say, my ERP is a disaster. So publicly they'll say, no, it all works well. Doing what I've done in the past with these briefings, they kind of bring all the dirty washing to the course, and then they call me in and they're absolutely naked. Saying, this thing's not working. And so I contend that processes and design output, the sixth step in my process is what I call a laboratory in war games. And I say you specify the processes. You don't go through a whole lot of discovery of the processes. You specify the process, because once the system is fully and properly and accurately precision configured, the processes drop out of the process and they're all strategically focused. And that way you get it right. But it's a radical change for the industry.
I mean, I love the diagram here, obviously the top-down strategy focus and obviously bottom-up process focused. I mean, is this another way how leaders can redesign governance, configuration, and the ERP becomes more predictably successful? I mean, is there anything else that you would add, or how would you advise these leaders to redesign governance or
well, my blanket in doing this, I mean, obviously I'm saying it needs to be strategically aligned. And the problem you find is people have difficulty defining strategy, and I'm going to sound even more heretical, but the whole mission vision stuff is all poppycock. You've got to go in there and say, what's the essence of the business? How does it thrive? How does it differentiate itself? What's its strategic drivers? And what I found was when I started talking about this, initially I couldn't define strategies. I was also a military commander, by the way. So I was trained up to brigade level, 5,000 combatants in all disciplines. What I learned there is if you make bad decisions, people get killed. So you need the right information at the right time in the right place in order to make the right decisions. And I brought that as well to my thinking. So you want to be fast-paced and you want to be able to move quickly and make decisions quickly. So, with that, I think that's the key point, that you've got to come down with strategy. And so I developed a method of measuring strategy. And if you come in strategically and you plan everything against that filter of your strategic essence, everything just runs more smoothly. I go so far as to say to people, the strategic essence is typically one sentence. And what I say to people on occasion, where the business doesn't really know it, and one of the things you've got to guard against, you bring in a new CEO, and this new CEO thinks they can invent the strategy. The strategy is organic to the way the business exists. So you take the strategic essence, you print it out in 3-inch high letters, and you put it on a banner over the door of every office in the building. And you have talks and say, this is the strategic essence. And part of precision configuration is you put the strategic data at the top of the table and you put the operational data at the bottom of the table, so that when people look at the chart of accounts, they look at the strategy first. So you permeate the organization with strategic understanding so that everybody understands the strategy and they're reinforcing it. And the business runs better. It's as simple as that.
I think that's fantastic. And I know you've got sort of a full presentation here that you could share with anybody watching, or people who are watching the podcast, feel free to reach out to Dr. James, regarding this presentation. He can go into more depth for you. Something else that I wanted to ask you, James, is I know you often repair systems, or you come in at these critical moments. I mean, is there a sort of a deciding factor when you think you should either try and repair or rescue a project, or when to just sort of start it from scratch? I mean, when do you decide to either rescue or rebuild an ERP project?
Okay. I just want to pick up on something that you said. I have a free 2-hour video, which people are welcome just to contact me, and I'll give them the link, and they've no obligation. They can watch the video, which goes into all of this in a lot more detail. And I'm running now on a regular basis this executive briefing, 5 hours why your ERP is not delivering and how to fix it. And again, if you'd like to attend, I've got one coming up at the beginning of December. They help. So to come to that question, I got into these things just on a gut feel engineering perspective. I just did it by gut feel and experience for years. And then not so long ago, I came across somebody who said, you need to turn this into a formula. And so I did. So basically what I say is, if I go in with your ERP, I will diagnose what's wrong. I will help you to establish executive custody. And there's an art to the executive custody, because you say the CEO has got to be the custodian of the ERP, but the CEO doesn't have the time or the knowledge. So you bring in a graybeard, somebody like myself, as an advisor and agent to the CEO to help run the ERP project, and they run in close concert with the CEO. And you also escalate everything to the C-suite. So you put the ownership, and this is answering your question of how do you do it, and I'll come back to your question of how do you know whether to replace or remediate in a minute. You then determine your strategic essence, and you align everything with that. We've talked about that in a bit of detail. We then get to the decision point, and the decision point is where you sit down and say, can we remediate this? Do we re-implement it, or do we buy something new? And I have a robust process if we decide to buy a new 3-stage tender-based, very tough RFP, which secures the client's interests. But that's a discussion for another day. The key point in making that decision, I contend that 95% of the time you can re-implement or remediate your existing ERP. Why do I say that? For years, the major ERPs on the market have been more than adequate to the job. The reason your ERP is not performing is not because you've got the wrong software, it's because you've badly implemented it. And my contention is that any significant ERP product on the market today, properly implemented, will get the job done. You might have to put some bits of bespoke software around the edges in order to deal with things. And just by the way, once you get into the strategic essence, you will almost always have a couple of little bits of clever bespoke software outside of the brand name ERP in order to maximize your strategic essence. But basically what I'm saying is the only time you're going to need to purchase a new ERP, and again, this borders on heresy. The only time you're going to need to buy a new ERP is if your ERP is 10 or 15 or 20 years old and really decrepit and not being maintained. Then yes, there's a good reason to replace it. That's kind of self-evident. Or if your business has grown dramatically, and I do mean dramatically, such that you need a tier 2 or a tier 1 ERP to where you were getting by with a tier 3. Apart from that, what I mean by remediate, just to be clear, is first of all, get the governance right. You get the strategic alignment right. You do the precision configuration, and you drop the precision configuration into the ETL so that the data warehouse and the BI is properly set up. That will give, because you can remap the spaghetti into your data warehouse so that you've got better data there. That's going to give you, it's the 20% that'll give you 80% of the benefit. You can then, over time, drop those new tables, the new item class, etc., into the ERP. If you do that with the chart of accounts, you're obviously going to need to probably do that over a financial year end. But basically, if you sit down today and apply this methodology, in a year to 2 years, you will be flying. And some of these things you can fix within days. And then the next thing, prove it works, is what I call the laboratory war games that I touched on earlier. And what that is you break it till you can't break it anymore. So you get your top people in the room, and your instruction to them is think think of the most obscure scenarios, the most obscure products, the most difficult customers, etc., and run them through the system until you can't break it. And this speaks to what we spoke about 15 minutes ago about the engineering approach not having failure. Engineers, if they're not sure about something, they test it in the laboratory. You don't have failure in the real world except under extreme circumstances. So what you're doing here is you're saying, right, break it. Go out of your way to break it. And when you can't break it anymore, you define your processes, you train your people, and you train every single user in a war game scenario until they are absolutely comfortable and conversant with the system. And then you go live. And when you go live, which is make it work, which is the CEO standing there and saying, right, folks, you tell me this is ready to roll, let's go. And what that looks like is that every manager, every consultant who's got anything to do with that project signs a certificate which says, I, the undersigned Joe Smith, hereby testify that I have thoroughly tested my part of the implementation, and I certify that it's right, and you can kick my ass if it's wrong. And the CEO then gets that team in the room and says, right, folks, I've got all your certificates in front of me. Is there anybody who chickened out and signed it when they shouldn't? Because look me in the eye now, I'm going to sign this and we're going to go live. And I promise you, if somebody signed this without proper certification, I'm going to be a very unhappy person.
I think just to highlight your point, I think it's that commitment from everybody involved to play their part and put their name on the piece of work and say, look, I've done all I can to stress test, let's say this system. And if everybody can put that commitment and their sort of name to it, then it's brought that team together and everyone's different perspectives to try and guarantee that success.
Absolutely. The thing there, George, is that one of the big reasons why you have disastrous ERP implementations is that they don't do this last step. They go live and they haven't thoroughly tested it. They test it in the live environment, which is absolute suicide. It's madness. And the client has every right to say to the consultant, you told me it was okay to go live. It was not okay to go live. I'm going to sue the pants off you. And it comes back to what I said about the engineering thing. You do that in engineering, you will end up in front of a disciplinary tribunal. You will almost certainly lose your license. And if you've done $172 million worth of damage, as in this recent case with SAP and Deloitte's, I forget the name of, I think it's a pharmaceutical company, which is big news at the moment, you will end up in jail. You know, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damages. Tires stacked in the parking lots because they couldn't dispatch them. But I'm straight. If you do this right, you will thrive. And thrive looks like increased profitability, increased efficiencies, and increased competitiveness leading to growth. And underpinning this whole thing is this engineering approach of rigor, discipline, systematic working. So now coming back to your question about when do you replace?
Yeah.
Essentially what I'm saying, George, is most of the time you don't need to replace. And again, as I said, it's kind of like heresy because the industry sort of runs on a cycle. As you've badly implemented your ERP, you've had it for 5 years, you're sick to death of it, so let's sell you a new one. And I'm saying, no, you don't need to buy a new one. You just need to fix the one that you got.
The only two reasons, as you've rightly mentioned, it's either a business outgrows an ERP system, but that's only if you're moving up to a tier 1 or a tier 2 level, and it's only if you've rapidly grown. And then the only other scenario would be is if it's maybe a 20-year-old legacy system and it's just outdated and you can't have any customization. There's nothing that could make it compete with maybe a modern day ERP system. They're sort of the only two options you'd advise to get a new ERP system.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. And just again, why the civil engineering experience is so relevant. If you take let's say we've got a 10-story office block and the tenant that's been in that office has really not looked after it. As a landlord, you are unlikely to demolish the building and build a new building. You will go in there, you will gut all the rubbish that the previous tenant put in, you'll put in new partitions, make it look all shiny and new, and you'll re-let that to responsible tenants. And that's what we're talking about. You know, my contention is that a properly implemented ERP has a 20-year investment time span.
Yeah. Definitely. I was just thinking, obviously, on the topics that you've mentioned there, and the involvement from leadership as well. The CEO needs to, well, everybody at that C level needs to be invested into this implementation because it's going to affect the entire business. And I know you mentioned the behaviors as well. They need to be, confident, but they also need to have that self accountability at every level when stress testing, when implementing the new system. What other behaviors from leadership separate ERP projects that stabilize quickly, maybe after an implementation, to those that kind of never really recover?
The most successful ERP implementations I've been involved in, the CEO looks at this and says, this thing's got to last for 20 years. It's probably the single biggest investment that this business is going to make in the foreseeable future. It has the potential to wreck the business, and it has the potential to help the business to thrive. Therefore, it is vital that I give high quality time to this project. The most successful project I ever did, the CEO had a failed ERP project. They'd done an implementation. They aborted at the last minute because the strategic alignment was completely off the mark. I met the CEO. I was talking at a business school on IT, and he came up to me afterwards and said, look, I've got this failure. Can you help me? So I went in, established that the ERP was absolutely, there was nothing wrong with the ERP. It was just the way it was implemented. They had swim lanes and flow charts. The implementer proudly showed me this file with full of flowcharts. And I said, okay, put it on the shelf, didn't look at it again, and he was offended. Gave me time every day. Every day I was on site. I would pop into his office when I arrived for 5 minutes, debrief on what was planned for the day and get his inputs. At the end of the day, I would stick my head round the door and we would debrief for 5 minutes. Every significant, important workshop he sat in on. The weekly project meetings, he sat next to me. I chaired the meeting, but he sat next to me, delegating his authority to speak on his behalf. When we did the laboratory in the final testing, he sat in the room and made sure that everything was to his liking, so that when the decision to go live was taken, he was absolutely 100% certain that what was there was going to work, and it did work. And because the CEO is so focused on the project, everybody else is focused on the project, because you don't go wandering off when the CEO is in the room. And I appreciate that this was a modest-sized family business, 90 years old, et cetera, and this was a 50% shareholder and CEO. If you're talking about a FTSE 100 company, the CEO hasn't got necessarily the time to do that level of involvement. But the basic principle of saying this is the most important thing that we are doing in this business right now, and everybody will give it top priority. And that's got to come from the top, and the top has to walk in that.
Yeah, they have to believe it as well. They have to be confident and you have to believe.
Part of that is about believing that if I put this time in, it will work. And then part of that is backing that project up with somebody like myself, who literally has that experience and can advise that CEO and say, CEO, I think we should do this and not that.
100%. I mean, you've given so much good insight. I know it's only a snippet of obviously your career and presentation, which I know anybody can access online or contact you directly. But it kind of brings me to my final question for you. It is a big one, so feel free to take some time to think before you answer. But if you could rewrite one rule in every ERP contract tomorrow to ensure systems deliver measurable value, what would it be? It's quite a big question to answer.
The answer is quite simple. Do it my way or else. In other words, use James Robertson's accelerator methodology, and the CEO will lead. And you accept, Mr. Implementer or Mrs. Implementer or whatever, that in the event this project fails, we will sue the pants off you. And because of this contract, we will succeed. What I have when it comes to procurement and what it comes to potentially negotiating a new contract with the implementer is a really, really tough RFP, request for proposal, geared to safeguarding the client's interests. So everything that I've ever seen an implementer pull out of the hat to screw the client, excuse my language, is contracted out in that RFP. So the thing that you face is, if you go with the implementer's contract, it's strong, it's effective, it totally safeguards their interests. What my RFP does is it balances that with a contract which totally protects the client's interests. And it occasions a conversation about what are we going to do if this goes wrong? Because implementer, you are purporting to be an expert. As an expert, I expect you to take 100% responsibility for the outcome because you are my advisor. And you do this all the time, and this is the first time I've done this in how many years? Therefore, I will take you to court in the most onerous, tough, harsh manner you can imagine if this project fails. I would expect you to recompense me for all my losses and all my costs. And you'll say the average implementer won't sign. There's a trick to that. What I'm doing, because one of the traps of the traditional way of ERP implementation is that it creates dependency. There's a lot of mumbo jumbo. What I'm saying is actually, if you have an ERP that you've been running for a couple of years and your staff know your way around it, you hardly need any implementer input to do the project. What you do is you put together an in-house project team. You back those people up with temporary staff. You, for example, so you put the chief financial officer on the project for 50% of their time, and you bring in a fractional CFO to do the running of the business so that your permanent CFO can put in the necessary time. And you do the same with all the other key people all the way down the hierarchy so that you've got a team that does it, and you do it as a business, as your own project. And you bring somebody like myself in as a high-level advisor to help you steer the thing. But there is generally not nearly as much need for external consultants as most people believe.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for coming on to the ERP Perspective. I think you've got some great insights, and people who are looking to potentially get involved into a new project, or maybe they have something that they need advice on, I think they could definitely utilize your advisory work. And please, anybody watching that would need advice on their ERP implementation, or would likes Dr. James' content or what he's spoken about today, please do reach out to him. I'll put in the comments below a link to his videos and his material, so you can reach out to him directly. But thank you so much, Dr. James, for coming on to the ERP Perspective, sharing your insights and educating the community on this topic. Is there anything else that you'd like to end this episode with?
Well, I think the key takeaway, George, is I'm now starting in the new year, as I said, starting in December actually, running this executive briefing why your ERP is not delivering and how to fix it. It's a 5-hour intense delivery of everything that I've talked about today, just elaborated in more detail, that a C-suite executive can take away an action. So if you're sitting, if I'm speaking directly to the audience here, if you are sitting with an ERP that is not meeting your requirements, I suggest that you enroll for that briefing at your earliest opportunity, and I'll give George a link to the web page to go and sign up for that. And apart from that, George, it's been great talking to you. I think it's been for me, a great experience. I think it's really nice to have an opportunity to talk to somebody who's receptive to a radically different way of doing things.
100%. I'm always open to new ideas. I mean, the ERP Perspective is about allowing people to give their different perspectives on ERP topics and share their insights and what they've seen. So thank you so much for joining us today. And this has been Dr. James on the ERP Perspective.
Thanks so much.